In it here now, what are you gonna do now? I'm gonna bid on here now. Who bid $500,000 bid?
Welcome to the Legacy of Agriculture. This program will explore the past, present, and future of agriculture. We'll look at the people, products, and events that have formed its history. And now, with today's guest, your host, Chris Bair.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. Thank you for joining us. If you don't catch us on the radio at WNX Radio, you can join us on Apple, Spotify, and now we have a Legacy of Agriculture YouTube site. And of course, if you can't catch us on any of those, simply go to our website at thelegacyofagriculture.com and you can catch any of our back episodes, or if you want to know more about the Legacy of Agriculture, that's a great way to find us. If you've got any comments, good or bad comments, you can email us at legacyofagriculture@gmail.com or simply give us a call right here at 605-836-2277. And today, my guest is Rick Meyer. Rick was born on a small farm in northeastern South Dakota, and I heard part of his story just within the last week or so, and I invited Rick to be on our show. Rick, thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you.
You grew up on a farm clear up by Sisseton.
Correct.
Sisseton, South Dakota.
Actually, Rossold.
Rossold, okay. And that's just right off the western Minnesota border and not too far from North Dakota, too.
Exactly. It last town before you get to North Dakota or Minnesota. So it's really up in the corner.
It's right up in the corner. So you were born, I don't want to tell everybody how much experience you've got, but your younger years was in the 50s. What was that like growing up on a farm in the early mid 50s?
Well, when I look back at it, it was quite interesting. We were very poor, but I didn't know it.
Okay. That might not be a bad thing.
Yeah. I was too young to know that, but I enjoyed growing up on the farm and the experiences, and some of them were good, some of them were maybe not so good.
What was the winters like in northeastern South Dakota in the wintertime when it was so cold outside?
It was brutally cold.
Okay.
We lived in a small house. Barely want to call it a house.
Right.
It had no insulation in the walls, so when the 20 and 30 below winter came, it was really cold. Really cold. We had a small, it was called Jungers, kerosene stove that sat in the middle of the living room. And at night, we would have that running, and we would all sit around the stove. We didn't have any TV. It was just a radio running and a single light bulb, and we sat there, and the side of us closest to the stove was getting really hot, and the opposite side was freezing. So we just kind of slowly rotated ourselves around to try to keep ourselves warm.
And one single light bulb above the kerosene. So
Right.
Now that's before my time, but did that kerosene stove have a flue in it? How did it exhaust the gases out of the house?
It did have it did pipe out to the chimney. Yeah.
Okay.
But I remember the smell of kerosene, because there would always be a little bit of kerosene spilled or something. So the whole house kind of permeated of the.
Well, kerosene doesn't completely burn, so there had to have been the smell of burned kerosene as well. Indoor plumbing?
No indoor plumbing. And of course,
and
it was
20 below zero.
It was so cold that we couldn't have indoor plumbing. It would freeze.
Okay.
So
how in the world would you keep warm sleeping in a bed when it's that cold out? Lots of blankets?
Yeah. We had woolen sheets.
Okay.
And lots of comforters, lots of of blankets.
Quilts.
And sometimes we'd heat a brick or something up and in the stove and wrap it in a blanket and stick it in bed with us.
Wow.
And basically you'd curl up in one spot and don't move, because once you got that spot warmed up, that was it for the night.
You didn't move very
No.
far. So what kind of animals did you have on the farm?
The main income was from dairy cows. We had 12 dairy cows.
Okay.
That my parents milked twice a day. And then we had chickens and geese and ducks. The chickens were raised for our meat.
Okay.
And I really hated when my aunt would come and they would butcher the chickens.
Really?
Because they'd, chop the head off and let them go. And I really saw the chicken with the head cut off running around the yard.
Yuck.
So my cousin and I just kind of got lost at that point.
So you mentioned 12 milk cows with a little bit of emphasis. What was the magic number of 12 milk cows? Why 12? That's just
pretty much that's what the barn would hold.
Okay.
Yeah, we had 12 stanchions.
Did you sell the milk or did you consume the milk? Your family?
It was sold. It was a lower grade of milk, but it was. We milked it using pail type milkers.
Okay.
So we'd milk a cow and have to carry the milk back to the milk room and run it through a strainer, put it in milk cans, and put the milk cans in cold water to keep them cold. And then every so many days, a truck would come and they would swap out our full milk cans with empty ones. I think a couple times a week.
Several times. So you had to really concentrate in the summertime on keeping that milk cool in the milk pails, so that milk didn't spoil or get bad.
Right.
Did you consume a lot of the milk that you?
I'm sure we did, but it was our source of income.
Yeah. You don't want to drink. You don't want to drink your profits away.
Right. And then of course each cow would have a calf, so we'd have 12 calves.
Right.
And eventually they would either enter the herd as a replacement or we would sell them. And one of my big responsibilities was feeding and taking care of the calves.
Okay.
And that was kind of typical for a young boy or girl. Their assignment was take care of the calves.
Yeah, for sure. So you were probably, as cows were freshening and et cetera, you were probably milking what, 8 cows a day, 10 cows a day, or would you milk all 12 year round?
Pretty much year round. So we must have had additional ones in the pasture.
That was a while ago.
Yeah.
What was it like? We're getting down to the last minute or so, but what was it like putting hay up in the summertime for the cows?
That was a big thing that I was involved in. And we put some of it up in the barn itself, upstairs in the barn.
Yep.
We'd have to bring it in on hay racks, and we had slings, what they call the ropes,
yep,
that we had tied to a carrier and pull it up and into the barn and
this
trip
was all
it.
This was all loose
hay,
loose grass
yeah.
hay. Yeah.
And then we did a lot of putting the hay up in haystacks. And as my teenage years, I was involved with the running the loader and building the haystacks, which when I think back at it was a very dangerous thing. But somehow they seemed to have faith in us of not doing something really stupid.
Folks, we're going to be right back with the second segment of the Legacy of Agriculture.
Hey, this is Jasmine at Piper's Auction, Realty, and Land Management. Piper's offers multiple ways to bid and buy at our equipment and land auctions. You can bid online, in person, or place pre-bids before the sale even starts. By providing convenient bidding platforms, we make sure that you can buy the items or parcels you want the way you want to. Visit Pifers.com to see a complete list of our auctions. When it comes to bidding, go with Pifers. Nobody does it better.
Folks, this is Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. Thank you for joining us on WNX Radio, Apple, Spotify, and also on YouTube. If you miss any of those shows, you can go to our website at legacyofagriculture.com or simply send us an email if you've got a comment at legacyofagriculture@gmail.com. My friend and guest today on the Legacy of Agriculture is Rick Meyer, who grew up on a farm clear up in the very northeast corner of South Dakota. You know, that's a mouthful. Northeast corner of South Dakota. So if you ever, sometimes I struggle with directions, and that might be why. But we talked about Rick's growing up on a farm, a dairy farm in South Dakota, clear back in the 50s. And we're talking about putting hay up in the summertime. So you were talking about running and making haystacks with loose hay in the summertime. So at that time, explain the process.
Well, it would start off with typically my dad or my uncle would mow the grass with a 7-foot sickle mower.
Okay.
And when I got old enough, which was around probably 6-7 years old, I started raking the hay. We had a little 2N Ford tractor.
Yep.
And I raked hay and I raked hay and I raked hay.
On a 2N, I can't imagine a more miserable job than raking hay with a 2N Ford tractor. If I remember right, the 2N Ford tractor only had a 3-speed transmission, and you didn't have floorboards. You had to keep your feet on pegs at that time.
I still have it.
You still have that?
I still have it, and I'm going to do some restoration this summer on it.
And it was on rubber, though.
Yes.
Yeah, it was on rubber.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good. They didn't lift much.
The 2N was released in Second World War in 1942.
Yep.
And the idea was that if things got really difficult in the war, that they could put them on steel wheels. They could run it on a magneto.
Yep.
So there was very little needed for the tractor. The one that we had everything.
Right.
Rubber tires, distributor.
3-point PTO. Fenders, the whole 9 yards.
The whole thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, because you were involved in agriculture at that time. And you're right, that was a wartime tractor, for sure. What other tractors did you have on the farm just for fun? Do you remember?
Well, as I got into my teenage years, I guess I'm going to say, I don't know exactly where, I graduated from raking hay to putting the hay up.
Okay.
And we had an unstyled A John Deere.
Okay.
That had a farmhand superior loader on it. And those loaders could really reach high.
Yep.
My dad told me that one time he tipped it over backwards.
Yep.
But somehow
I've heard of them tipping many of them over, but not backwards.
Yeah, backwards.
I would imagine that was quite a ride.
Yeah, I would imagine too.
Unstyled tipped it over backwards with a farmhand loader.
Yeah.
Wow.
I wasn't quite old enough to be able to turn over the flywheel to get it started, so I had to make sure that I didn't ever kill it because I would be.
Then you'd have to go
stuck.
Get help.
Yeah, I have to go get help.
Didn't even think about that. So that's how you put the hay up with a unstyled A John Deere.
We ended up buying a bunch of pipe that had come out of old steam engines.
Okay.
And we built a cage the size of the haystack we wanted to build.
Okay.
And so we'd set this cage up, and then I would dump the hay into it. And when it got up to a certain height, someone would get up into the stack and move it around and adjust it and stuff. But I was responsible of getting it up there.
And that's part of compacting the hay so you could put more on.
Right.
Plus, it would preserve better and probably wouldn't get as much rain and snow and so rainwater in it.
Try to get it curved on the top so the rain would run off of it. And then when we got done, then we took some twine and found a couple rocks and threw several twines over the stack to hold it down so that the wind wouldn't
Is that right?
pick the hay up.
That was your form of tarping,
That was tarping.
strings on rocks.
Right.
Wow. That's a great idea. That's a cheap way to do it, too.
Yeah.
Very good.
We also put hay up in the barns, and that was kind of a different process. We had some old hay racks that were two-wheel, and we would lay down slings, which were basically had a clip on one end, and then there were 3 ropes. And we'd lay the 3 ropes down, and then we'd dump a load of hay in it, settle that down, then we'd put another sling on top of that. And typically we could get 3 to 4 sling loads of hay onto the trailer.
Wow.
We would then haul that to the barn, and most barns you'll see a protrusion out one side of it, and doors behind that.
Yep.
And there was what we called a hay carrier that traveled on a metal rail from one end of the barn to the other. And we would pull that out to the very tip of the barn, and then lower it down, connect the slings onto it, and then someone would use a tractor or a truck, and I was the truck driver or tractor driver, and would pull on a rope, which would then pull the hay and the slings up. When it got to the very top, there was a trip mechanism that would trip it, and it would go back into the barn, and we'd kind of estimate how far we wanted it, and then we had a rope that we would pull that would trip the sling and drop the hay.
Dangerous?
Dangerous, yes.
That's the only thing. I'll bet you that would be an OSHA-approved process in this day and age.
OSHA would have...
they would have just all died right
Yeah.
there. They would have had a heart attack and died. It's very interesting. But back 70 years ago, though, Rick, that was technology.
That was technology.
That was ingenuity. That was efficiency, and all of those things that we would look at in this day and age and go, that's terribly inefficient way to put hay up.
But I think nowadays there's a lot of younger people that have never seen that happen.
Well, and that's part of the purpose of the Legacy of Agriculture, is talking about some of these processes that have been long gone. That was before my time. I mean, I've heard people talk about the farmhand loaders, and I've read some history about the farmhand loaders. That was a heck of an invention back in that day and age, because that loader lifted to such a dangerously high level, but the owners didn't view it that way, because that was replacing what several men could do in a day. And look how efficient it made that process clear back during that period of time.
And I was taught as a young child running this, that when I went around and bucked, we called it, collected the hay, that I needed to keep it low until I got to the stack.
Sure.
Then stopped and lifted it up, and then carefully went forward. Because if it was lifted up and you hit a gopher hole or something,
oh yeah,
the whole thing could have.
Sure. And that's kind of this, if you ever learn to run a tractor and loader, you don't want to run the tractor down the road with the loader clear up in the air with loaded, because you're going to wreck it. Somewhere along the line, you're going to have a wreck soon enough. Is correct? So, but anyways, well, hey folks, we're coming down to the end of our second segment of the Legacy of Agriculture. Rick Meyer, a local farm boy from northeastern South Dakota, is joining me on the show today. For more information, we want to thank our sponsors, Pfeiffer Auction and Realty, and also Richard's Repair out of Larchwood, Iowa. We appreciate the good people at Richard's Repair. And we're going to come back into our third segment and continue with Rick's journey through agriculture. He stayed in agriculture all of his life, but his career took a little bit of a different change after he graduated from high school. And folks, we're going to be right back with the second segment of the Legacy of Agriculture.
Hi, this is Jasmine at Pfeiffer's Auction, Realty, and Land Management. Pfeiffer's offers multiple ways to bid and buy at our equipment and land auctions. You can bid online, in person, or place pre-bids before the sale even starts. By providing convenient bidding platforms, we make sure that you can buy the items or parcels you want the way you want to. Visit Pfeifers.com to see a complete list of our auctions. When it comes to bidding, go with Pfeifers. Nobody does it better.
Folks, we're back with the third segment of the Legacy of Agriculture. Thank you for joining us. We're having a very interesting conversation about growing up on a very rural South Dakota farm, clear back in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Rick, what are some of the interesting memories that you have with growing up on the farm?
You know, some of the things that happen to farm kids nowadays, child protection and everything else would be
OSHA Child Protective Services. It goes right on down the line.
Right. My parents told me about this. I was too young to really remember it, but they had to go out and milk the cows twice a day. And I was about a year old. And so they brought me out and locked me in the milk room, which was a little room in the corner of the barn. They then went out and gathered the cows together to get them into the barn. Well, while they were out there, I somehow managed to get out of the milk room, and I crawled all the way from one end of the barn to the other through this manure-encrusted alleyway, and I ended up sitting in the doorway watching what was going on. Well, it turned out
the doorway that your folks were trying to get cows through,
right,
to get them into milk.
So my parents got the cows up to the doorway, and they wouldn't go in, and they were pressuring them harder and harder to try to get them in the doorway, and they didn't know why. Finally, the head cow, Ada, we called her, made this flying leap through the doorway, and it was then that they saw me sitting there in the doorway, and she completely cleared me without touching. I'm amazed sometimes at animals and how they realize the significance and importance of other animals and children.
Yeah, other humans for sure.
Yeah.
But that was a very interesting experience for your parents.
Yes.
You were probably at that age probably too young to scold, because they were doing what they thought was right by locking you in the milk barn.
Right.
Or
it was my fault getting out.
Yeah, it was your fault, even though you didn't know.
A lot of the things that I ended up understanding later in life, I learned from the cows. One thing that was interesting is when we got a new cow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we had 12 stanchions.
Yep.
And each one knew which stall, which stanchion they were to go to.
Right.
Well, when a new cow came, she didn't know where she was supposed to go, so she just picked one.
Right.
And there would end up being mass pandemonium with cows going back and forth trying to figure out where they should go, because their stalls were occupied.
The newbies created
Right.
all kinds of chaos and drama.
We'd have to go and sort out and figure out who was in the wrong order and get them reordered.
With only 12 cows, you probably didn't have a lot of turnover, so they were probably all named, right?
Oh, yes.
What were some of the names?
Oh, you can stump me on that. Ada was the main one.
She was the main cow.
There was a cartoon strip in some of the farm magazine, Ada the Ayrshire.
Okay.
And that's what she was named for.
Ada the Ayrshire.
Yes.
Well,
and you know, the situation of the cow coming in, I found out later when I was working for a while in corporate America, and I would find that when we had a meeting, everybody seemed to have their favorite chair.
Right.
And so I enjoyed coming in and sitting in someone else's chair and see the pandemonium that would ensue.
It's called the psychology of the event, is what it is.
Yes.
Because you really messed with somebody's head when you sat in their chair.
Right.
Just kind of, that's the same psychology that those cows went through when when the new cow was in the wrong stanchion. Aaron Buchanan.
Yes.
So last week I did a Legacy of Agriculture with Aaron, and he's in the new technology that's taken place.
Right.
And it's absolutely crazy what technology is doing for agriculture and what technology is doing just for the dairy industry, and how it's completely changed the face of the dairy industry, of the dairy world.
Mm-hmm.
But so after growing up on the farm, you left the farm.
I left the farm. My parents didn't want me to farm.
They did not want
They
you
did
to farm.
not.
Okay.
They felt that they farmed because they had to,
Okay.
and they were hoping for better and greater things for their children.
Okay.
And so I went off to
So
college.
they recognize the value of education.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I went off to college and ultimately got a master's degree in what's called engineering physics.
Okay.
And I spent 1 year working on a PhD, but found that I was becoming overqualified.
Okay.
So I stopped my education and began looking for work. At the time, my father had some heart issues. And so we returned to the farm to help him, ultimately ending up buying our own quarter section of land. And for the next 10 years, I farmed with my dad and had to bring in the newer technologies, the four-wheel drive tractors and the bigger combines and so forth. But as he got to the point of retiring, I had to look at the whole farm situation and realize that it's extremely difficult to farm on any large scale alone.
Right.
And the people around me that were farming successfully typically had 2 or 3 brothers farming together and were able to share resources. I realized I didn't have that. I couldn't rely on hired help on a long-term basis. And so I terminated my farming at that point, retained the farmland, and went back into engineering. And I went through several different engineering realms there, and ultimately ended up coming and being able to put my engineering degree into agriculture.
At that time, you were married?
Yes.
You were kind of newlyweds at that time, you and Evelyn, weren't you?
We were newlyweds. We did not have our first child until we had returned to the farm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Evelyn's a farm girl.
She's a farm girl.
Out by Huron, Madison is where she grew up.
In Willow Lake, which is halfway between Huron and Watertown.
Okay. All right. That
Close
makes
to
sense.
Clark.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you two didn't grow up too far away from each other then?
Not really.
Probably back in the day it was far enough, but
right.
It
wasn't until college that we met each other.
Ah, that's right.
Yeah.
Hey, folks, we're down to the end of the segment of the Legacy of Agriculture. We're going to be right back.
Hi, this is Jasmine at Pfeiffer's Auction Realty and Land Management. Pfeiffer's offers multiple ways to bid and buy at our equipment and land auctions. You can bid online, in person, or place pre-bids before the sale even starts. By providing convenient bidding platforms, we make sure that you can buy the items or parcels you want the way you want to. Visit Pfeifers.com to see a complete list of our auctions. When it comes to bidding, go with Pfeifers. Nobody does it better.
Folks, we're back. I'm Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. Thank you for joining us on WNX Radio. We're also on Apple, Spotify, and our website, legacyofagriculture.com. Or you can join us and see this show live on the YouTube channel, Legacy of Agriculture YouTube channel. Rick, thanks for taking time to be with me today. We've had a great conversation in the first 3 segments. They're talking about growing up on the farm, but you grew up on the farm. Your parents wanted you to go get an education and saw the value of the education. You came back and farmed, and then you stayed in agriculture, but you moved towards technology. Tell me a little bit about that.
I always wanted to keep my foot in agriculture.
Sure.
I really missed the farm.
You're a farm boy.
I'm a farm boy.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. And it wasn't until a couple different companies that I worked with that I had the opportunity to go work for a company here in Sioux Falls that was heavily involved in and is heavily involved in agriculture, Raven Industries.
Yep.
And there was quite a change in agriculture and how things were and are being done.
Sure.
My father reminds me that my grandpa had horse-drawn equipment.
Yep.
And by the way, I have pulled them out of the trees and I'm restoring them.
Really? Some of the horse-drawn equipment.
Right.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Lawn display.
Yeah, lawn ornaments is what
But
we
I get
call them.
worked up. I could use them if I had to.
Nah, we don't want to go back that far.
But anyway, my dad would tell when my grandpa finally got his first tractor, that they would hear him out plowing. And if the plow hit a rock, the plow would disconnect from the tractor.
Yep.
And my grandpa would yell, "Whoa, whoa!"
Because he was so used
He
to
was so used to the horses obeying his command.
Wow. Do you remember what that tractor was?
That was the 2N.
That was the 2N.
That was the 2N.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible. No wonder you've kept that tractor all these years.
Yeah, it has sentimental value.
Wow.
But when I was farming, when we planted corn, we had to use markers and try to keep our rows relatively straight. When my dad was planting corn, he was always looking behind him, so he was always wandering all over the place. And when I started planting the corn, I kept my eye on the mark.
Yep.
And people thought we must have fixed the front end of the tractor because the rows were so much straighter.
You keep your eye on the mark.
Yeah.
Right.
But now pretty much everyone is using GPS. And it's kind of gotten to the point where if GPS isn't working, the farm stops working.
Dead in the water.
This was, I think, the case this last spring when there was some solar flares that temporarily blocked the GPS satellite signals. And people were wandering around the field trying to figure out
how to make a straight row.
How to make a straight row.
But the difference between 70 years ago and today is that if you had a 4-row corn planter, that was a big corn planter. Most of them were 2-row. You go to 4-row, but now you got 36 and 48 rows. So you're dealing with a totally different cat.
Yes, entirely.
So
entirely.
Tell us about the technology and how you were able to influence technology in agriculture. That's very interesting to me.
Well, one of the things that I was hired for was to work with what we called field computers.
Okay.
And that was getting the computers into sprayers and tractors and so forth. And I was involved in the displays and touch screens and developing some of the computer screens and trying to keep them easy as possible for people to operate, especially in around the world.
Yeah.
You had to try to find symbols that would make sense, like the rabbit and the turtle and so forth. And
make it universal.
Make it universal as much as possible.
So you were involved in the research and development portion of it.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I eventually, when I got to 70 years old, my wife told me it's time to retire.
Okay. She's had enough.
It's had enough. So
and let me guess. Then you came home from retirement and she told you to go get a job.
Actually, I came home from retirement for about 6 months and was bored out of my skull. And Raven called me and asked me if I'd be interested to do some consulting work for them.
Okay.
And this was involved in what they call the autonomous tractors. And the first thing they were working on was the grain carts that could self-drive themselves over to the combine and back to the semi. And so I was involved in the early development of some of that.
What was that like? I mean, I'm not going to say that I'm illiterate when it comes to technology, but I struggle to keep up with the technology. That might be a better way of saying that.
Yeah.
So what was that like? I mean, the goal is to get that grain cart to the combine, get it loaded back to. So what was the processes in the research and development to do that?
One of the things were extensive meetings, and many of the other engineers were former farm boys as well. But we would have meetings trying to figure out what could go wrong.
Oh,
and
there's a million things that could go wrong.
Exactly. And what do we do to mitigate the damage there?
Right.
And like setting up emergency stop buttons on the grain cart, on the combine, on the semi, that if something was going wrong, somebody could push the button and it would stop.
Right.
And of course, you couldn't send a signal to them to say stop because the signal might not get there. So you had to be constantly sending a signal to them saying that everything is okay.
Right.
And when it lost that signal, that's when it stops.
So you had to actually do some reverse engineering to accomplish just that basic first function, which is grain cart's in trouble, everything stops.
Right.
Right. Very, very good.
I was very involved in the communications, cellular, Wi-Fi, and so forth, looking for the newest and best cellular modems and technology and testing them in many conditions to see which ones were the best. It's interesting in the early development, and I wasn't really directly involved in this, but the autonomous tractor has a number of cameras on it that is looking in all different directions.
Yep.
And there's a computer that's watching this video, and we had to send pictures of everything that could possibly in the field to a company that then got that into the computer.
Yeah.
So it could see a coyote running across the field,
Sure.
or it could see a cell tower and no, stay away from that.
Hey, folks, unfortunately, we're down to the fourth and final segment of the Legacy of Agriculture. We're going to continue this show into our bonus round. So if you'd like to listen to this continued conversation that I'm having with Rick Meyer, you'll join us on Apple, Spotify, and also on our YouTube channel, or you can simply go to legacyofagriculture.com, and we'll be right back with our bonus segment.
Hi, this is Jasmine at Pfeiffer's Auction Realty and Land Management. Pfeiffer's offers multiple ways to bid and buy at our equipment and land auctions. You can bid online, in person, or place pre-bids before the sale even starts. By providing convenient bidding platforms, we make sure that you can buy the items or parcels you want the way you want to. Visit Pfeiffers.com to see a complete list of our auctions. When it comes to bidding, go with Pfeiffer's. Nobody does it better.
So in our last segment, Rick, we were talking about all of the ins and outs of technology and helping Raven Industries develop the technology to make the grain cart autonomous. That's a very interesting conversation. Not too many Legacy of Agriculture shows ago, I did one with a gentleman who is heavily involved, and they're just finishing up and have built their first autonomous truck. And I got a picture of it here a couple of days ago. I'll show it to you. But for feeding in feed yards. Mm-hmm. And they now have the technology that this truck is completely driverless. They built a truck that has no operator station. It's a frame, all the drive components, an engine, and the technology to drive that truck, to mix the feed and to deliver the feed to the bunk with no place for a driver to sit. Now that's been coming for a long time on the in the tractor industry. We've seen some cabless tractors over the last 5 or 6 years. But you were very involved in the formative stages of some of this autonomous. Tell us more about what that looked like.
It was really an interesting time.
Yep.
In that you could say this was a leading edge, maybe bleeding edge
Sure it was.
technology.
Yep.
Trying to make sure that no bad things happen. That could lead into lawsuits.
It always has to
and
be
everything
safety
else.
first.
Safety first.
Yep.
Yes. And I think that's some of the challenges that they're having with autonomous cars and so forth. Also, is trying to get that safety first.
Yep.
But one of the emphasis of doing this has been the difficulty of getting labor on the farms.
Yep.
With the autonomous grain carts, it's been a challenge to get people to operate the grain carts. Oftentimes, it's a retired farmer or something.
Sure. Or a neighbor.
Or a neighbor
Looking for a part-time job.
Right. Yeah. And I can see the same thing with the feeding of livestock in feedlots. Very doable technology now on that.
So where do you see, as we kind of wrap up this our interview, Rick, where do you see where do you, from an engineer's perspective, see the technology moving in the future?
I think a lot of the technology really is in data collection
Okay.
and data management.
Okay.
Early on, when I worked at Raven full time, we were working a lot with prescription maps for fertilizer and herbicide and insecticide, trying to maximize performance with minimum inputs. And the ground varies a lot across the field, and the requirements vary. And nowadays, with some of the modern technology, we're gathering data. For instance, the yield data that comes off will give us a good idea of the condition of the soil. And so that can be used by agronomists to determine what type of fertilizer and how much fertilizer. And we see coming up that's already in the field, the technologies that will identify and spray individual weeds rather than just broadcast over.
Sure.
We tried to do that when I was farming. I had a spray rig on my tractor, and when we'd come across a thistle patch, I would turn the sprayer on while I cultivated and turned it off when the thistle patch was gone. So spot sprayed the field.
Spot spraying.
And
sure.
now they're getting that spot spraying down to the individual weed.
Yeah. We have several people in our company that are quite familiar with that process, and that is just, to me, is 110% mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and it used to be early when I was at Raven that we could turn booms on and off.
Section control.
Yep. And now it's down to individual nozzle control.
Yep. Well, you take into consideration the technology that's just on a planter right now, and what those planters can do with row shutoff and all of the technology that goes into it. It's changing agriculture to where you have to be quite educated in order to just operate the equipment to run a farm now. It's almost like it's flip-flopping in a way. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. I am renting out the farmland that I have, and my renter is in his mid-60s, and he's finding himself being overpaced by the technology.
Obsolete.
Obsolete, yes.
Don't tell him I said obsolete, but it is. It's
he relies on his son to program the computers and get things set up. Once it's programmed, then he can drive the machine.
I bought a pickup not too long ago, and I actually chose to buy a pickup that was kind of a bare bones pickup because I didn't want all the technology on it. I didn't use it. I didn't see it being advantageous, and I didn't want to repair it when it broke down. So I actually bought a stripped down cloth seat pickup to drive because I didn't want all the technology on it. My phone, which connects to it, has all the technology that I need to get from point A to point B. So
that's why I enjoy restoring old tractors.
You and me both. You and me both. Well, hey, Rick, we're down to the end of our show. I greatly appreciate you. I would like to invite you back. I think there's lots of things that are in your mind that I would like to get out onto our show. And I'd also like to interview your wife, Evelyn. She, I heard her speaking last Sunday, and it was very interesting listening to her talk about being so active on the farm clear back in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. Driving tractor and
it didn't make any difference if you were a boy or a girl.
It did not matter when you were gonna. My little sister worked just as hard as the boys did on the farm, and my older sister both on the farm growing up. So, well, thank you very much, Rick. I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
In it here now, what are you gonna do now? I'm gonna been on here now. Who bid $500,000 bid?
We hope you've enjoyed today's edition of The Legacy of Agriculture with Chris Bair, sponsored by Pfeiffer's Auction, Realty, and Land Management. Call Pfeiffer's at 605-836-2277.